Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Mobile Games Are Bad. My name is Vlad, and I'm currently working for 10 Square Games. Now, you may have heard about 10 Square Games, but if you haven't, then I wouldn't really be surprised, since mobile game developers tend to fly a bit under the radar. However, I would not make the mistake of saying that 10 Square Games is a small developer. Not by a long shot. I mean, our flagship game, Fishing Clash, is on par in terms of revenue with the likes of Angry Birds or Plants vs. Zombies, which I'm sure you heard of both. Now, personally, I think that's quite impressive. But enough about the present. Let's talk about the past. You see, I've previously worked at Ubisoft. I've shipped a few AAAs in my time, but then I decided to make a change. And what really ended up surprising me wasn't the change itself, but rather the reactions I was getting from friends and colleagues. These reactions ranged anywhere from calling it a downgrade to claiming it wasn't profitable, all the way to, are you bloody mad? So I thought I would put together a small presentation to talk a bit about what I've heard. And that brings us to our first point of discussion. Mobile games are not a creative medium. Okay, first thing, what even is a creative medium? Well, in broad strokes, pun intended, it's the substance an artist uses to create an art piece. It's the paint on the canvas, the stone in the sculptor's workshop. So, if we were to admit that PC console games offer a creative medium, then why shouldn't we say the same thing about mobile gaming? I mean, in the end, most mobile phones are slightly less powerful versions of a Nintendo Switch. And I would wager that if you ask someone to name a game that they feel is artistic, a significant percentage of them will point to a game on the Switch. So, by that logic, the issue isn't with the medium, but with what we make of it. As such, we should be able to have some artsy games on mobile as well, right? Well, we do. Here are some that I take a particular liking to. The first one is Monument Valley. It's a neat little puzzle game with a simple and elegant graphical design, and I already hear you say, so what? Well, this game was featured on the TV show House of Cards, and the interesting bit is that it wasn't a matter of the developers paying the show producers to showcase their game. No. It was the other way around. The showrunners liked the game so much that they worked it into a minor plot point of the show. Which then brings us to Splice, one of my personal favorites. Splice is a really good example of a well-made mobile game. The main game mechanic is simple, yet expands in difficulty without overcomplicating the game. And the art style is minimalistic, yet I feel it perfectly complements the gameplay. And the soundtrack goes without mention that it is perfect for getting you in the right mood to play the game. Moving on from my preferences, here are two more games that I find fit this category well. You have likely heard of them. Mainly, Sky Children of the Light and Pokemon Go. The latter, while it does not excel in art style, really pioneered a new and creative way to play mobile games. So, I would say mobile games can easily be an artistic expression. Sure, you won't get ultra-realistic water physics in a mobile game, but you can still put emotion into making them and provoke emotion in the players playing them as well. But let's move on to the second point. Mobile games are not challenging. I see how people could think mobile games are overly simplistic, given that a lot of them are meant for a more casual audience. Because of this, mobile games have their gameplay centered around a fairly simple game mechanic. Now, having just one core mechanic sounds simple on paper, but really it just makes development that much more difficult. Take your average AAA, for example. You have stuff like world traversal or combat, dialogue systems, vehicles, mini games. What happens if you start removing these systems one by one? Will the game still be fun? I would say that more often than not, it won't be. So having a game that stands on a single mechanic is not a trivial accomplishment. Now, that is the challenge with mobile gaming. And to put it frankly, in mobile gaming, the game mechanic is only the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more than the player sees. And a lot of mobile games are free to play, which means they have in-game systems meant to handle stuff like progression, economy, and much more. And they do this all while being completely transparent to the player so as to not overwhelm them. To get something like that to market, you're gonna need analytics, market research, a highly qualified live ops team, and really much more. So I would say that making a AAA equivalent mobile game is really more of a scientific process where you don't base your decisions on what seems to be right, but rather on what the data shows as being right. And speaking of data, that brings us to our next topic, monetization. Okay, yes. Mobile games are filled with microtransactions and ads. I think everyone at some point came across some kind of an ad pop-up with a comically small X button. So I really understand where this one is coming from. But we need to consider that these are just monetization methods. They're not inherently bad. They are usually just poorly implemented. Consider this. Mobile games are much more upfront about what they offer, in the sense that they always advertise in-app purchases before you even download them. And you don't need to pay in order to find out if you like something or not. So let's focus on microtransactions for a moment. Normally, their intended use is in a free-to-play game. They are what enables the free part of the free-to-play experience, allowing you to play the game without the need to pay money, at least to a certain point. Which I would say is pretty good, since it makes games more accessible. Also, remember back in the day when we used to have demos? You could try the game before buying it, and in a way, that's what we also get with microtransactions. You don't need to spend money in a game to see if you like it. But microtransactions are difficult to implement correctly. Monetize too little and you risk not making enough money to keep your business viable, but monetize too much and your game just becomes a glorified checkout simulator. So let's take a quick look at microtransactions in non-free-to-play PC console games. Because personally, I loathe microtransactions in a game that asks you for money up front. And a lot of times, these microtransactions are time savers, meaning you end up paying to play less of the game. Now, that's ridiculous. But moving on, let's talk a bit about in-game ads. Personally, I've seen numerous examples where in-game ads were just done wrong. And the kicker is, a lot of what is wrong with in-game ads isn't even the fault of the developer, at least not directly. ads are served in games through third parties known as ad providers. These third parties are the ones that decide what the ad will show you. And more often than not, they will also be in charge of putting that little X on the ad frame. Of course, developers get to choose which ad provider they sign up with, but that's a whole other topic. And speaking of advertising, that brings us to our next topic. Mobile games have too high an entry barrier. This is another very good point, but let me ask you this. What highly profitable market isn't also highly competitive? Think about it for a moment. If you have a market that is constantly growing and is proven to be a really good source of revenue, then of course you'll have a lot of people trying to get into said market. So let's move away from mobile games for a moment. And let's say we're a new developer who has this great game idea, the money to make said game, and we're thinking about where and how to publish it, right? Now, if I was making a PC game, I could of course try to publish it on Steam. So let's see how many games get released each month compared to Google's Play Store. So by looking at the data, we can find out that Steam has around 800-ish games published per month, while the Play Store is around 16 to 17,000-ish games. Okay, so it's quite clear that by publishing on Steam, we have significantly fewer competitors, 2 orders of magnitude fewer, in fact. However, is that enough to just allow our game to grow on its own? I'd say no. Mainly because all of Steam's published games have an initial price attached to them. Sure, Steam allows you refunds to some extent, but I've never heard of people that just open Steam's newly released page and buy whatever they fancy. Other than perhaps game journalists, that is. But more often than not, when we buy games, we do it because it was advertised to us. Or at best, we hear about it through word of mouth. On the other hand, you could try to publish on a curated storefront like the Epic Games Store or Origin, or maybe even Sony's PlayStation Network. That will definitely get you more exposure, assuming that what we publish meets the criteria of those storefronts, and you have enough connections to get the discussions going in the first place. Some of you are probably well aware that publishing on a closed storefront as a small developer is anything but simple. All in all, I would say publishing a game nowadays without marketing and having it be successful is really a unicorn, and it doesn't matter where you publish it. And last but not least, mobile games are not profitable. Now, I'd expect that the people who believe this are in the minority, but just in case, I thought I'd go and talk about some numbers. So let's start with a statement. PC console gaming has a market share greater than Hollywood. So much so that your average AAA has a larger budget than your average blockbuster. Now, this is important because mobile gaming has a market share greater than PC and console gaming combined. Yeah, no joke. So to put it simply, the largest player base is on mobile and the largest revenue is generated by mobile games, at least if we're talking entertainment. So with all of this having been said, are mobile games really bad? Personally, I would say no, but I will leave you with this. I've been in this industry for over 4 years now, and honestly, I grew bored. The funny thing is, I didn't even realize how complacent I had grown until I started working on mobile, which really presented itself with a whole new set of challenges. So I will end by saying this. Give other branches of our industry a chance, and don't let preconceptions stand in the way of opportunity. Thank you.